What up, party people? We're here. It's the season finale of Talking TV. We're here. We did it again, Chris. We did a full year this time, from beginning to end, January to December. We did an episode for the most part every single week, buddy. How do you feel?
I think we did it every week. I don't think we missed.
There were a couple. I thought there were a couple. Wait, were there a couple weeks that we missed or no? Did we do it every week?
I don't think we allowed a single week to be missed, man.
Forget what I just said. Then we did an episode every single week this year.
You know, I hate to curse. We fucking did it.
We did it. We absolutely fucking did it, dude. Again, 185 subscribers in what was it? 9 months, 10 months, something like that. Like, come on.
9 months, 3 days. Thank you all so much for contributing to that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Like, I mean, I wanted to talk about that for a second because, like, it's important. It's a momentous occasion. This is our 67th episode overall. Obviously, we're going to do a big thing for the 100th episode, but like we said, 12 seasons in a movie. And like I've been kind of laying the groundwork up until this point. You know, season 1 is when the tone was established. I think we definitely did that overall. Again, just like I was like look back at nostalgia on our rookie days overall. And then season 2 is obviously again where most shows show what they're capable of, and I think we more than did that overall. Just again, everything that we've accomplished during the pandemic, our move to YouTube, our just expansion into other content, our just brave and bold-headed nature as far as going into the unknown and leaping feet first, and
most importantly, our unwavering honesty when it comes to the Marvel franchise.
That too. That above all else. Well, Marvel, and I would like to throw The Office in there. Again, there were a lot of truth that came to light this year. Again, I finally came to terms with my relationship with The Office. You finally came to terms with your relationship with Marvel. There was a lot of catharsis that happened this year overall. Again, I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to throw it. I don't want to kind of confuse this year as what it really was. Everyone kind of knows 2020 is like the worst year ever known to man, but I'm not going to lie. We had a great year. We had an awesome year just as far as showing what this podcast is capable of, showing what we can accomplish on this channel. And I hope to do that for many, many years to come.
Yeah, same. And if I could just speak to that before we kind of jump into the normal type of stuff we like to cover on this show. It's funny that is sort of where you went in regards to the similar themes both of these movies share. Because, I mean, I think for us this year was when the going gets tough, you got to get tougher. And I think we really did that. It was difficult. But you guys certainly gave us a reason to push through and sift through the nonsense. But we did that. And I feel like I have something to show for this god-awful year. I wish this year never happened. But like you said, Dom, it is what you make of it, even in the worst situation, guys. So if there's one thing that at least I can leave you with from what I've learned so far in this year, it'd be that. Just keep pushing along.
It's funny because everyone that I've heard talk about it, they're like, oh, it's so boring. There's nothing to do. I just work and that's it. I go from my bed to my desk to do my online job and that's it. I'm like, bro, I've been getting up at 6 every morning for the last 4 months, going to work 8 hours, coming back and just doing nothing but podcasting. Like literally to the point where this last week, like these last couple days, like before and after Christmas was like the first like actual real break that I've had in a couple months. And guess what? I feel great about that because guess what? I'm going to clue you guys in. I'm going to get a little philosophical here for a moment. So bear with me for a second. Human beings need purpose. I mean, I feel like that's kind of safe to say as far as just overall, just our understanding of us as a species. We need purpose. We need things to get us out of bed. There was a reason why whenever people are unemployed, they are more laggy and they don't get as much stuff done. And for me to take the 2 weeks that I had off, the only 2 weeks that I had off since this pandemic started overall fully, and devote them entirely to podcasting, literally going to my friend's house to use his internet when power knocked out when a power storm knocked out my internet. Like, again, we put in the work is the moral of that little story overall. We put in the work, and I don't think there's a single day that I don't feel ashamed or I don't feel like I wasn't kind of doing something to kind of contribute to the forward moving nature of this podcast overall. So a little bit of a pat on the back to myself. But again, like Chris, just you being my ride or die since day one. I just wanted to throw a shout out to you first off, because like for you pitching the idea to me in the first place and getting me to actually do it after, for the most part, my YouTube channel had, failed spectacularly over and over again. And for you kind of giving me the push it again, like being like the perfect, I don't even know what the perfect equivalent is to describe it, but it's like the perfect kind of cap to my energy, the perfect yang to my yin. Again, like we wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to do this without you. We would not be able to do this just overall without each other. And I got to give all the props in the world to you for that.
Likewise, man. I couldn't imagine doing this with anyone else. Dude, that's the thing. Like, how many bands have I been in that have gotten signed and then I've restarted? It's just creative endeavors to be an artist, independent creator, it takes a lot of time and energy. And I definitely loved your first YouTube channel. That's the main reason why I want to do this with you. I thought you were more interesting than the normal guys who just, they give just the mainline opinion. They're afraid to deviate from what everyone else is saying because they want to be accepted, and you never did that. And so you inspired me in a sense to find a whole new avenue of creativity that I love. I never thought being a critic, being a critiquer, commentator could be so rewarding. It's such an art form that I was just so blind to. So you helped me find like a second passion that I never thought I'd find outside of music, man. And like you said, I can never do the show with anyone else. So I also want to commend you. I appreciate you so much. And I love working with you as a team. And hey, man, we got this fucking beautiful community now that is one of the most, the best thing I have in my life right now, honestly.
I mean, it's funny because I go back and look at those comments that like some of my most viewed videos on my old channel got, and I'm like, oh God, why would I even want to do this if I just have to sit here and deal with these types of people all day long? But like being on this channel has definitely kind of informed me of like the positive sides of YouTube and the internet, and that for all of the darkness of the internet, there can actually be some light. So I just wanted to say, again, a quick shout out and thank you to all of the people who just have been there for us since day one. All of our collaborators, all the people who faithfully come back to us every single time we go live. Overall, again, we've got plenty more live streams for you guys as far as that going forward. And again, it was just as somebody, since I would regard myself overall as a very, very, just a massive cynic overall, just again, like props to the YouTubers who have come through for us overall this year and showed me that like, hey, it's not always the case. People can actually like be good every once in a while. There is still a reason to have some faith in humanity. And real quick, before we dived into the topic, I just wanted to bring up our first commenter of the night, Brian Beebe, who brought up, wanted to watch Wonder Woman 2, but they're charging $30 to watch it once. I wasn't aware HBO Max was doing that. So Brian, you'll have to kind of inform us as to kind of what led to that decision, because that's strange, because only because I didn't have to pay $30 when I watched it on Christmas Day. So maybe they started charging after Christmas Day, which would be the scummiest move yet. But
it wouldn't surprise me either. But Brian, I mean, listen, I get it through, thankfully, one of my cable packages is one of the cable companies that sort of has that bundle with HBO where you just kind of get grandfathered into HBO Max. But a couple of my friends actually just started either the 7-day trial or it was $14. They did the 1-month HBO subscription. They figured they'll binge His Dark Materials and a few other shows that kind of came out this year and make the most out of the month. So I don't know what happened there, man. $30. You're going to have to explain that a little more.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry,
unless they're doing what Disney did with Mulan, but I can't. Then again, expecting HBO to not rip off Disney is a little bit of a tall order, especially these days. But so, Chris, you want to dive in? Again, we gush about ourselves and what we've accomplished for our channel. Let's dive into the movies, because again, we've got not just one but two movies to talk about, and also people. Oh, that's why he lives in Canada.
Explains it. That sucks.
That explains
Sorry
it.
to hear that,
man. The one time where being in Canada doesn't give you the advantage. I apologize.
Right.
But so, Chris, we were gifted this past Christmas Day, a couple days ago, with not one but two movies that went directly to streaming. Again, I would argue that this was kind of the beginning of the studio's new move as far as this new decade comes overall. Again, this episode is entitled Battle of the Streaming Services, for good reason, because once again, HBO and Disney are taking their well-known feud. I don't care what anyone says. Just calling it a feud is just more entertaining for the purposes of, like, people, we run YouTube channels. We have to keep the shit entertaining. There was a reason why clickbait is the means by which modern day news makes their money. But we got two movies directly to streaming service, and not just like movies that felt like they were made direct to streaming. Again, as much as I've loved the Netflix movies that we've gotten, like I was craving a little bit more. I'm like, man, I need that little bit of action and I need that little bit of good animation, because I haven't watched a single animated movie this year since Onward overall. And so we got these movies both dropped on Christmas Day 2020. You got HBO Max, Wonder Woman 1984, and on Disney Plus you get Soul, the brand new Pixar movie. And my thoughts as far as these two movies go, just so the people know the structure of this episode, we're going to talk about Wonder Woman first, and then we're going to talk about Soul right after that. And just to kind of kick it off with Wonder Woman, obviously it's well known that the relationship with the kind of the DC movies in general, since those started back in 2013 with Man of Steel, has been a rocky road, to say the least. Obviously, going back to the original, the OG Zack Snyder days, man, it feels so long ago. Like, Man of Steel came out 7 years ago this year. That's insane. Like, I still remember seeing that movie in theaters. But it's a rocky road, to say the least, as far as getting to kind of the path that we're on now. Snyder immediately followed it up with Batman vs. Superman, which was followed later that year by David Ayer's Suicide Squad, which kind of tanked the overall progression of the DCEU at that point. And then it was followed up by the precursor to this film, Wonder Woman, which again, smash hit. Everybody loved it. Followed a couple months later by Justice League. Everyone was pissed off because they claimed to, so pissed off to the point where we ended up getting a whole fan campaign for yet another Snyder Cut, which we've already talked about multiple times. And then that led to kind of this year-long break that kind of led to like this weird transition point that DC has been in these last couple of years where they've released some canon movies, I guess for lack of a better word, some non-canon movies overall. They've kind of just been like playing around with genre. Again, you followed it up directly with DC, Worlds of DC movies, Aquaman and Shazam. I feel like a lot of people's thoughts on that were mixed. I personally liked those movies, didn't really love them overall. It's followed up by The Joker, which was a movie that was not canon, but again, was a mid-budget level adult movie that made $1 billion and was nominated and won several Academy Awards. So there's that. And then they followed up, obviously, this year, starting off with Birds of Prey, obviously pre-COVID, pre-everything that was going on. Man, Chris, remember when the title of Birds of Prey was one of the biggest things to talk about? Remember that?
Oh, yeah, and the emancipation of one Harley Quinn.
Oh, wow. I'm impressed that you actually remember that subtitle.
I remember stupid things.
That shit was so stupid that it's like, I'm like, it's funny because we like every single time we want to give Warner Brothers the benefit of the doubt as far as like they can improve and they can, because it's not even to the point where Marvel is beating them like with both hands time behind their back. It's the fact that Warner Brothers is intentionally tripping over their own feet. It's like every single time we think that they can't out-stupid their last move, they somehow do. To the point where whenever they do have a success, we're almost like giving them props for just like not fucking up. It's kind of sad when you think about it, especially when you have, and I feel like I myself have both made well known that our relationship, I think, with the comics of DC kind of trumps our love with Marvel. And again, the thing that's so shocking about the Marvel movies is just the fact that they've been smacking the DC movies around like since day one overall. Despite, I would say, the vast
undisputed, for sure.
Yeah. Despite, I would say, when it comes to the vast superiority of the comics, the TV shows, just everything other than the movies that DC, and again, even their solo movies they put out that were non-canon prior to this. Again, this is we got, for the most part, every Batman movie is a success. The Christopher Reeve Superman movies back in the 70s. Like, I don't know what it is that happened with DC recently as far as just their leadership or just their general approach to their movies. Like, I have no idea overall. But
yeah, I mean, Jeff Johns really isn't delivering the way I thought he would. Maybe that's a podcast for a different day, but he's one of the reasons why I kind of got involved in this whole nerdy space to begin with. Like his Rebirth runs and even before that, his New 52 runs, especially that Aquaman run is so coveted and so legendary. And he's like the guy overseeing all that, creating this Flash lore that we now know and love. And just to kind of see what happens now that we've had so many movies under his supervision, it's there. Let's just say there's more misses than hits, unfortunately, as someone who is more so a DC fan than a Marvel fan.
I'm actually really glad that you brought up Snyder overall, because again, obviously the DC Extended Universe, the Worlds of DC, sorry, Johns.
Yeah, it's all good.
Whatever name this kind of subversion of Warner Brothers superheroes decides to go with, again, it's gone through a couple of different leaders. Obviously, again, Zack Snyder kind of leading the charge with the Man of Steel, Batman versus Superman run. Then again, I believe Jeff Johns came in, I believe it was around 2017 when it was between Wonder Woman and Justice League. But a lot of things, above all things, there was also the big thing where Warner Brothers was going through a change in leadership overall at this time. Again, Walter Hamada famously came in and replaced the last guy who was the last CEO under whilst the Snyder reign was going on. And the ironic thing is that, like, for the amount of changes in leadership that have happened, again, they just keep seeming to get worse overall. And every single time they seem to have a leg up, they just trip and fall down another flight of stairs and have to climb back up again. So at the risk of sounding kind of too perverse with that last metaphor right there, I was not trying to make it too obvious with the Sisyphus metaphor. That brings us to Wonder Woman 84. Famously a movie that, like every other DC movie that seems to have come before, that has been racked by problems going into it. But ironically enough, not because of the work of the studio overall. Mostly, again, just because it dared to be a movie that tried to come out in the year 2020 past March. And so as a result was delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. But of all the movies that got pushed back to next year or pushed directly to streaming, this was the one that they were like, no, we are sticking to theaters. At least until Warner Brothers came in and was like, nope, going on HBO Max for Christmas Day. And that's going to be sort of our new strategy where we're going to release everything on HBO Max for a month at a time and effectively kill theaters. So this movie comes out Christmas Day. Again, it's a big shock. It's a big event overall. Again, it's like finally we're getting a big budget, because this is different than, like I said, than all the movies that came before that. This is a big budget superhero movie that we're getting directly in our living rooms on Christmas Day.
It's been a while.
It has been a while since we got a movie of that caliber in theaters. Like I think the last one that we watched was Birds of Prey, because the majority of movies that we watched in theaters prior to the shutdown
we went and saw Tenet. Obviously, Tenet was the biggest blockbuster since Wonder Woman to really drop.
Right. Yeah. And
that didn't get pushed back to another year or whatever.
That was another movie that just like, yeah. Chris Nolan,
what are you
doing? Could not fight the COVID. Well, tried, failed when it really never had a shot to begin with. Again, that's a podcast for a different day. Again, tune in for a certain Talking TV host's reaction to that movie when he watched it for the first time. Oh my God, I can't wait. But so, Chris, this movie drops on Christmas Day, and everyone is anticipating. I remember, obviously, my family were raring to go. After the presents were open, they're like, all right, we got HBO Max finally, because I have HBO Max. Ironically enough, right around that time, finally made the deal with Roku so we can get the app on Roku so we can watch it on TV. We turn on Wonder Woman 84. And Chris, what were your thoughts with this movie? Well, first off, rather than asking you what your thoughts were after you finished the movie, what were your thoughts about like a couple minutes into the movie? What were your thoughts about halfway through the movie? And then what were your thoughts once the movie was finally finished? Because I feel like it's like a little bit of different reactions there just based off of what I've heard from other people, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, the opening sequence is safe. It eventually went on to do nothing to enrich the story. There was no amazing callback with that character moment where we see young Diana sort of competing in this triathlon, and of course we see her win, spoiler alert, but she doesn't win the honorable way. So we harken back to that moment in the first movie where the queen tells, I believe that's her aunt, be harder on her than you'll be on anyone else. And so she was, and she got the win stripped away from her rather in the final second. And I thought, okay, cool. It's familiar. I liked the first film. I don't think the first film was incredible by any means. I think it was as close and safe as you could play it, but it worked out because Gal Gadot is very charming in this role, or at least was. We'll get into that. And Chris Pine was a very strong sort of fish out of water storyline, enlightening her on the way the world works type role. And they had a great chemistry in that first film. So it starts off super safe and it refamiliarizes you after it's been 3 years with the Wonder Woman setting, which is cool. I mean, I was not thrilled with that creative choice, but it certainly wasn't the poorest of creative choices they could have made. So needless to say, I was feeling curious and hopeful, as I think most people should if they enjoyed the first one, or at least didn't hate the first one. I feel like the jury might be out on that one. I don't really know, but I at least didn't hate it. And so then we kind of make our way into this reestablishment of the character, and it's fine. It's confusing. They really do a poor job of painting you in on exactly where she's been in the past 60 years, which, like 30 years.
However long. I think it's 65 years because it's the first one ends in 1920 and this one picks up in 1984. Well, it's in the title, 84. So 1919, 84. You do the math there.
And which is fine because, I mean, we know the character. She's made other appearances in the DCEU since, so we at least kind of aren't left without context where we're like, what happened? It's been 3 years since I saw that first movie, and I'm just thankful for connective universes sometimes because we are at least like a little more familiar with her than I think audience would normally be, with especially how this goldfish mentality, it's here today, gone tomorrow. But it was a weak kind of start. I mean, she obviously was in the typical first act, just kind of getting you reacquainted, corny jokes, lightheartedness. That's all fine. You kind of expect that from these formulaic films. Obviously, it's not like the Marvel formula, but DC, these action films, I did a Mission Impossible binge, they all hit the same beats. You hit the beats you need to hit. It wasn't the greatest, I'd say, execution within this formula, this template. Nonetheless, it still hits it. Anyways, we established the villain. It's obviously Pedro Pascal. It's not the greatest at this point. So I'm feeling kind of tepid is the word I'll use going into the second act. The second act hits and it's just like, if we got barely any exposition in the first act, don't expect any at this point.
The second act.
Yeah, don't expect any at this point. I feel like I'm going to start to sound like Pat here, but this is where I wanted to get up and start cleaning my room and throw the movie on in the background. But I knew that was a little too premature. And to give my all to this podcast right now, I simply could not do that. Needless to say, the second act was tough to not pick up my phone and go on Instagram. It was tough to not text my friends back. It was tough to not see what YouTube notifications were going off. It was hard to get through, but I honestly can say that I focused on it. until the third act came, where it all, in my opinion, falls apart. And we're obviously going to get in and dissect this thing further, guys. I'm just kind of trying to hit Dom's points he gave me. This film just really falls in on itself. I've never seen something implode. I've always wondered what it looks like. And now I've seen that. And it's so sad because, again, there is charm here. There is potential here. But they just failed to execute. And I'm not the guy who came up with this. I actually wanted to see what the big dogs were saying because I have a point to bring up with the major pre-embargo reviewers later on. Something I've kind of realized, but then I kind of forgot because we haven't gotten a blockbuster in a while. That kind of recame into my memory that I wanted to say, Dom. I wanted to say this later on this time last year. Then COVID hit. But Jeremy Johns pointed out that the CG was already bad. Anyone with eyeballs can point that out. But Hollywood does their famous thing where they make it dark so you think it's not as bad. And it's just at that point, I hate to say it. My pillowcase had a bit of dust on it. I recently rearranged my closet. I got up there and I dusted it. I was like this. I was like trying to watch my TV while dusting. And I just, dude, this movie, you walk me through your three phases because I don't want to steal it. Walk me through your three phases because it was a frustrating ride.
All right. Well, first off, you already get more credit than me because you managed to say two through the second act. Like, I mean, for me, the fact that I didn't walk out the minute that Kristen Wiig walked out of the screen here, I'm like, props to you for that. Because, okay, so here's what I'm going to say about this first and foremost before I actually get into my thoughts is that it became abundantly clear in this movie that this movie was kind of following along the same track of Aquaman and Shazam, where it's doing this weird thing that a lot of the DC movies are doing now, which is where they both are in the Snyderverse, but they're not, where they go all but acknowledging the fact that they are the same characters and they are in the same timeline that appeared in Justice League overall, which, needless to say, again, it's so hard to compare movies superhero movies continuity overall. But again, when Marvel has done how many movies now and they've made their chronology and overall continuity look flawless, it just makes other superhero franchises just knocks them down a peg. And the fact that this movie expects me to believe that this took place in 1984, in those 100 years that happened between the first Wonder Woman and Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, and we're still expected to believe, oh, wait, Superman's still the first hero and nobody's ever seen a hero. That's like, but again, that has nothing to do with this movie overall. So I'm going to kind of try and leave those opinions out the, not here. And so I start this movie and I'm not going to lie, at the opening scene, I didn't like it, but it wasn't the worst thing that I've ever seen. Like, again, I'm like, I knew exactly what the movie was going for just as far as showing. It's like, oh, she's going to have hard choices to make overall. And then like, once we get through the first act and everything, I'm like, this is stupid. And I've seen this before, but this is like, I'm just like, it's whatever overall. And you know what it is? Again, because it wasn't really a three phases step to me. Like, I didn't have kind of the, oh, this is whatever to, oh, God, why do I care to, oh, God, what is this movie? I didn't really have that reaction, weirdly enough. I was kind of the opinion where it's like, okay, we just get this. And I kind of have to watch it for the sake of just being on the internet in general. But again, I know it's so hard to kind of take this, kind of overall on its own versus the overall DC continuity. But the thing about the first one that felt so refreshing is, again, it had the benefit of coming off of a batch of movies that had been really bad. Like for the lows that this movie hit, Batman versus Superman and Suicide Squad were like just rough points. Not just in that film canon, that brand at the time brand new film canon, but just like to be a superhero fan who had sat through garbage movie after garbage movie after garbage movie, and you finally get, again, Marvel had finally gotten a good kickoff as far as showing, okay, no, superhero movies can actually be good, and then DC comes in and almost tanks it, as far as I'm concerned, just their own chronology, with arguably a batch of better heroes, and Wonder Woman comes in, and Wonder Woman is so refreshing. I'm not going to say because it's safe, but because it's able to kind of take all those familiar beats and actually kind of utilize them well. With this movie, on the other hand, it kind of slid into those safe routes and kind of made its mark there, for lack of a better word. It was like, oh, the 80s are popular. We're going to shove that in your face. Oh, Donald Trump is popular. We're going to make the villain a Trump-esque figure who's secretly a pathetic loser, but really wants overall power. Sure, that's an easy thing to do. Oh, we're going to literally give the only other important female character in this movie the Jamie Foxx storyline from Amazing Spider-Man 2, and kind of this faux attempt at portraying feminism compellingly, right? Again, at the risk of sounding kind of too at the risk of sounding like kind of too anti-feminine, I just wanted to put that out there overall. And
yeah, I don't think he did. It was forced.
It was forced. And then for the movie to end and to try and pretend like it's important when really it's got the same half-cocked, half-baked message of be kind to everyone, don't lie, tell the truth. It's like, God, I'm not 9 years old anymore. Like, I'm sorry. Like, and again, I don't want to throw too much flack at it because, again, this is a superhero movie, and superheroes ultimately are not designed for people our age. It just doesn't help that a majority of the people who, for whatever reason, just ended up gravitating towards these movies once they finally started to become good, happened to be in our age range. And so as a result, the studios have constantly tried to play this card of trying to make superhero movies appeal to all age ranges and all demographics. And again, the Marvel movies seem to have been the only ones that have been able to do that. And this movie, I'm not going to say was trying to do it, but at the same time, like, it's very clear to me that, like, that this movie is being aimed at a very specific demographic. And I think probably the only surprise that I can say after seeing this overall, is saying, okay, I'm actually surprised that this movie got more mixed reactions than I was initially going to be led to believe, if that makes any sense.
It does. Yeah. You know, I just think, and if this is kind of where I wanted to speak about the pre-embargo reviewers versus the people like us who kind of, we play the game, but we don't really get the exclusives yet. Hopefully one day we get there, but like, we're not getting the streamers or the screeners. Sorry. Streamers is a music term. We're not getting the screeners. This means the same thing in the music world. There's a screener from the studios. And so what I noticed was, because I normally don't look up reviews before we give our opinions because I want it to be straight from the horse's mouth, aka my pure and honest, untampered thoughts. But with a movie like this, my thoughts are so clear, cut, and dry, almost halfway through it, that I just was like, you know what? First blockbuster in a while. Either way, it's exciting to get news this big in the movie sphere. Again, so I had to look up some reviews. And the one thing I noticed, and I can't really take credit for pointing this out, but this other reviewer I listened to pointed this out, but I agree with him. All of the people who kind of are not in Disney's pocket, but got the screener beforehand, were so easy on this film. They were so forgiving, and they even, like, I'm talking about like the big reviewers who kind of got like the advanced screeners, because this goes into what you were just talking about. Like, I feel like a lot of people are either just so in need of a big motion blockbuster picture that they're forgiving this film, or they're just shilling out for it for whatever reason, because it's a terrible film. I appreciate what it tries to do and what it tries to say, but it fails in doing that by just being so pompous and so over the top. I noticed that so many of these big reviewers, it's almost like they're in Disney's pocket, and I'm obviously can't confirm or deny this, but they were all just over the moon about this film, giving it 4 out of 5 stars, 3.5 stars, 4 stars. And it's just ridiculous. I mean, I cannot fathom how someone can say that this screenplay, which is so many holes are poked in this thing, and it's just doing something we've seen so many times before, just not in an interesting way, not adding a new take on it, could be this phenomenal, groundbreaking superhero film. It's just, I don't get it. It's really frustrating for me with this movie. Like, all the little dogs, like at our level and stuff, our peers, they were honest and cut and dry, but it seems like all these big guys were just shilling out for this film so hard, and I don't understand it because there's so many flaws in this movie.
I think it's interesting that kind of, just that shows just how out of the loop I am, because I think that every review that I saw, because again, I've just like kind of tuned out of like the big name reviewers, because I'm like, they're all going to be in the pocket somehow. And I kind of, again, I'm not going to say I kind of realized that early, but again, it's like you're in that, when you're getting in that position where you're getting those screeners from these companies, it's like you're going to feel like you're in that sense of privilege. So just by nature of like feeling that pure pressure of being in that same social club, I kind of understand where those thoughts come from. That's why I kind of just don't gravitate towards those types of reviewers anymore. And I just, again, I go back to me, still the most accurate form of movie, critique, for lack of a better word, today is in peers. Everyone's got a voice, everyone's got social media, and everyone, when you get a zeitgeisty kind of movie like this, uses that. And that's kind of what I go through. And again, outside of the normal people who are, again, just happy to have a new big movie to watch, I was actually surprised by the amount of people who tended to agree with me overall. I found a lot more lukewarm reception kind of amongst my peers. And I think that tells you something overall. And if anything, again, it just allows me to admire the fact that, again, people are not so desperate for entertainment that they're going to give this movie a free pass overall. Like, I have to give credit where credit is due, where this is a movie that, again, I feel like if it had come out in theaters like a year ago, I think there would have been the lukewarm reception, but it still would have had kind of that overall, just general word of mouth overall. Oh, did you see the new Wonder Woman overall? But I think that overall, obviously, kind of the impact of streaming makes a difference as far as that goes. But yeah, just like, this movie.
And
But
here's something else I realized, by the way, and we're just to like kind of just put the final nail in the coffin on that point I was kind of raising about, I think people being way too kind to this film. The review scores before this drop, the Metacritics, the Rotten Tomatoes, you know, when you Google, I just was Googling information about the film, getting excited, honestly, because like I said, I didn't hate the first film. I actually thought parts of it were very charming. I was looking forward to this movie. I noticed it was in the 80s, 85s, and now that sort of the pre-embargo reviewers have been sort of flooded by the regular normie reviewers who kind of went in and didn't get the privilege of getting this film early. It's down to like a 60 to a high 50s.
All right.
I think that just shows the people are speaking, you know, and I'm really glad that we're not settling for nonsense, because I feel like with the theaters being cut out of the process, corners might get cut. And I think this is a good example of the people not allowing that to happen, because the theaters are a big part of sort of keeping the studios beholden to a high standard, because we're not going to show this movie if it's not going to get butts in our seats. We could show something else. And once we lose that, we kind of lose that accountability. And I feel like the people are doing what you said. The lukewarm responses, I think, are warranted. And I just don't understand all these people praising this film, because we can get more into the specifics of the film. But that was just something I noticed in the whole zeitgeist that was just blowing my mind. You know,
it's kind of interesting because, again, like we're this movie is effectively the beginning of that transition that we were talking about in our Future of Cinema episode, where we're going to see kind of the transition away from blockbusters, because the studios are not going to want to keep putting all of their money into these movies that are not guaranteed to make a billion, that are not going to make $1 billion, because they're not going to open in theaters and they're going to go directly to streaming. So I don't necessarily know how much of the actual filmmaking and effects process of this movie was affected by that, because I think this movie was pretty much finished by the time it was ready to go for streaming, obviously. So I don't know how much that was affected overall, but I think just as far as kind of how that affects the movie from a critical lens, it's definitely interesting to view, because I think we're already kind of seeing the beginning of the transition of where, again, when people see a movie that they do not like, they will make their voices heard overall. And kind of the transition is going kind of, to me, back to where it should be, which is where the people, where, again, it's funny, I consider myself a critic, but as far as I go, the certain critics that kind of dictate the narrative have kind of had their power too long. And it's really annoying to me, because it has always seemed like, again, the only movies that can get the proper treatment and kind of spotlight shown on them are the big name movies. And this movie is still obviously being talked about, because, again, it's the first blockbuster we've gotten in like 9 months, but like, who knows what that's going to be going forward when like a Godzilla versus Kong or like a Matrix 4 is on the same level as like a freaking King of Staten Island or some other like, you know, mid-budget level movie that goes directly to streaming overall. Now,
it's a good point.
As far as kind of this movie goes specifically, and what it is that I have so many problems with, again, we talked about the simplicity of it overall. We talked about kind of, again, like just bad effects. I think it's safe to say, like, I mean, a lot of people said that like it really got bad in the last half, and they did that thing that movies always do, which is where they get dark in order to prevent the, you know, to show, in order to kind of not show off how bad the CG actually is. Which again, it's like that I feel like we regard a lot towards kind of later 2000s superhero movies. So it was disappointing that we have to constantly see studios go back to that. But for me, like the biggest thing that shows its hand here is the repetitive nature, how the idea is, Diana is pining over Steve Trevor. So what are we going to do? We're going to bring back Steve Trevor overall. Again, like the ideas that the movie is going for are not bad ones, but ones that we've definitely seen before. It's like, bro, why are we effectively getting the Aladdin treatment, but like if the genie was the bad guy, you know? That's effectively what this is, because the premise of this movie revolves around this item called the Dreamstone, which is another remnant or something of some ancient Greek mythology overall, that basically, again, it's exactly what it says. It grants people's wishes, but obviously at a cost. It factors into that kind of big allegorical thing of where, if you make a wish, you have to trade something in return. And that brings in Diana into conflict with her two villains that we have, that being, of course, Barbara Minerva, aka who will become the Cheetah by the end of the film, portrayed by Kristen Wiig, and Pedro Pascal's Maxwell Lord, famously a very, very, popular and effective and rather dangerous villain, famously in the comics, a telepath who took control of the entire Justice League at one point. I don't remember who was the one to snap everyone out of it. I don't remember if it was Batman or Wonder Woman, but again, a very threatening and imposing villain overall. And the idea being that, again, it's just the fact that he's just a regular guy who can control some of those powerful people on Earth. Again, just those stories are always relatable to a certain extent overall. It's really disappointing, because in George Miller's Unmade Justice League that was going to come out in 2006, they were going to make Max Lord the villain, and Jay Baruchel was going to play him. And that's a casting to me that I'm like, wow, that is such a tragedy that we never got that. But Pedro Pascal's characterization of the character overall, wow, that was repetitive at all. is again presenting him as this kind of faux Trumpian businessman who appears to be this giant TV mogul, but in reality, he's just a giant phony, and he's looking for kind of a quick fix. And obviously, in comes the Dreamstone overall, and he kind of incorporates the Dreamstone into himself. And again, it's a lot of superhero movie logic. Again, it's not really necessarily anything that you have to think about. It's pretty understandable overall. And he goes around causing and messing up, world peace in general. And Diana, of course, has to stop him. But Diana, of course, unintentionally wished upon the Dreamstone for Steve to return. So Steve's, and this was the thing that I feel like this was the biggest question that a lot of people were wondering going into this movie is, how is Steve Trevor going to come back? And he does this. Effectively, the Dreamstone basically hijacks this one random guy's body and transforms him back into Steve overall. And that's kind of like how Steve Trevor comes back. But of course, I think like kind of a big problem that I have with it is effectively that Steve Trevor, who I think for the most part had a really good relationship with Diana in that first movie, I think he provided like kind of the idea that he effectively had like kind of the sidekick part overall, but the fact that he was still able to like be like a competent part, it was a rather, dare I say, complex part that they had to pull off. And I think him and everyone kind of involved in making that character come to life. And the first one pulled it off. And I'm not going to say that bringing the character back is redundant, but it certainly is kind of annoying when especially becomes apparent that he becomes even more of a plot device in the actual plot device in the movie, which is the Dreamstone, where he is literally only there to show Diana, oh, you're going to have to let go of him. And I'm like, really? That's what we're doing here? Okay.
Yeah, man, this movie is just so baffling because, like you said, if it wasn't so cut and dry, they really don't explain anything. There's no nuance to sort of these tropes being revisited either. Like, there's no unique spin on it. That's the one thing that I'll give sort of the original Spider-Man films, or like the original Batman, like the Nolan, sorry, not the original, but the Nolan trilogy. Like, there are some tropes in there that all superhero movies have, but what those directors and those creators and those characters bring to those films, just take it and add something slightly different. And I think that's why those have become so iconic and so immortalized in the pop culture, even so many years later. And I bring those up because those are examples of good DC films. And in fact, good DC trilogies, that which Wonder Woman possibly could have become one had it not had this very unfortunate misstep, maybe even backward step, because now we know Patty Jenkins is leaving the project. But yeah, to speak to what you're saying, or it's rumored she might not return rather, but to speak to what you're saying is this movie is just, it's so dumb that it doesn't even benefit itself. It's so dumb that it's not smart enough to make good decisions that entice you and keep you into the film. And it really, to me, was probably one of the biggest waste of times I've had watching a film in 2020, which is unfortunate.
I think one of the biggest disappointments. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that first thing about Patty Jenkins, because Patty Jenkins actually, supposedly in the latest news release that I saw, did actually state that she would be coming back for a third one if they made it. Which again, I don't know why, because there's no way in hell that they'll make it for the same budget, or obviously just once everything kind of gets broken down as far as the dissemination of blockbusters to mid-level budget adult movies, who knows? But I think the biggest thing to me that this movie showed about Patty Jenkins specifically is just kind of her amateurism overall as a director. And again, amateurism is the wrong word to use, because she is an accomplished director. She made Monster, which is one of the best movies that I saw from 2003. And again, very, very rightful. Again, directed Charlize to her Oscar nomination and effectively delivered to Charlize the much needed transition in her career. Then followed it up 2 years later with North Country. And again, the whole thing with that first movie is that she was never originally supposed to direct it. It was supposed to be Michelle MacLaren, who had famously directed a lot of episodes of Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad. That was during that weird period where they were trying to make a lot of TV directors into movie directors, and it kind of never really worked. They had a lot of missteps and misfires, most notably to me, Alan Taylor and his handling of Thor: The Dark World, famously the worst Marvel movie, which ironically enough, Patty Jenkins was going to direct, but turned it down because she, quote, claimed that the script was bad. But the thing that I think kind of is the unspoken truth about the first movie is that during the first movie, everything was still very, very much in Zack Snyder's hands, and Zack Snyder was coaching Patty Jenkins throughout that whole first movie, and it shows, to be completely honest, because there are parts of that movie that feel like a Snyder movie, but not directed by Snyder, if that makes any sense. Like, it's got a very similar visual aesthetic to that movie, to some of his other movies, that were released at that time period. This movie, on the other hand, not at all the case. Like, very, very clear that like the visual style was different overall, and it was like weird because there are points where I'm watching the special effects shots And I'm like, was this directed by Sam Raimi? Like, with just kind of how slow they move, like how obvious the wiring is. Like, kind of like, I get that the movie is supposed to kind of like have this kind of corny old school nature. Again, that's an aesthetic choice that I just don't agree with, because again, we kind of had a little bit of a discussion the other night about kind of just the overall nature of corny things. I think that corny things can work when done right. This was not one of them, I think. But again, kind of the overall nature, I know people who like corny stuff, so that's just an aesthetic choice that I just personally don't agree with overall. I mean, I don't think you need to make everything dark and moody and grim, but like you don't have to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. But for this to kind of be kind of the follow to effectively DC's saving grace, and arguably still I would make an argument to say kind of not their best movie by default, but obviously one of their better ones. And for it to kind of just be this, like, where there are certain sequences in this movie where I see, her running up this very clearly, stage CG screen that's made to look like this gorgeous Greek amphitheater set against the backdrop of an island and an ocean. And I'm seeing a glare pop up on her character. I'm like, what is happening here? And then when she's like kind of, the scenes where she's learning to fly, and I feel like I'm watching the original Christopher Reeve Superman. Like, I mean, the movie is very clearly specifically trying to emulate those movies, but I don't think it does it kind of, it doesn't do a kind of a service to it almost, if that makes any sense.
I agree 110%. I mean, I've heard the mall scene, people were like, oh, well, they were trying to create sort of that like, very whimsical action sequence that a lot of the 80s films had. And I'm like, okay, you could say they were trying to do that, but they, in my opinion, failed to do that. Instead, they just kind of wasted our time. It was boring. We've already seen her at the full grasp of her powers in the other film, and we could have just sort of cut some of the fat there. And this film, to what you were saying, this film just, I mean, it's a shame because they had 3 years to make it, but it really seems like they needed a lot more time in the developmental phase. And hey, look, the one thing I was thinking is maybe the way it reads is so much better than it was executed and shot and produced.
I believe that.
I could believe that, but I don't think it reads that much better either. It's such a corny principle. We need to see what we have, because then we realize that what we have isn't worth giving up. And it's just like, okay, cool. We're gonna in a few minutes talk about a children's movie that achieves that, but even on a deeper level, 10 times better. So it's like, I don't want to hear those excuses. I'm sick of all the excuses for this film, because it is clearly a terrible film.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I wanted to wrap up my points talking about this movie, because I did very much want to jump into Soul, and I think I made it most apparent to you that I'm like way more excited to talk about that movie. Again, no spoilers for that movie just yet, but I think that's kind of the biggest reason why I'm not going to say I'm not as disappointed in this movie as I should have been. I think that maybe that's mostly, and again, for as bad as this movie was, and this is a bad movie, I don't hate this movie as much as I would some other movies. And I think another big thing, again, this is where I have to give credit to the people who watch this, who are like, the biggest thing to me, where I feel like if this movie had come out 2 or 3 years ago, even if it wasn't a theater, is the biggest thing that everyone will be talking about would be kind of the things that this movie accomplishes just for the sake of being another big budget blockbuster movie, whose entire purposes are to entertain. But the thing that I was getting really, really annoyed at was kind of in the last couple of years with these bad movies that people were willing to give passes because of implied social messages that the movie didn't even itself care about. And the thing that kind of impressed me the most about the people is that this seemed to be a movie that was like primed to be critic proof overall, where again, it's like, I feel like I was waiting for like somebody to come out in this movie and say, oh, well, if you don't like this movie, then you just don't like women superheroes. I was waiting for one of those responses overall. And the fact that like we didn't get any, and for the most part, like it's just been well handled overall, and just be like, no, we're saying we don't think this is a good movie because it's in a good movie. That to me is, I think, my biggest takeaway overall from that, if that makes any sense, kind of.
I think that there's a few different ways you can look at it. It gives me positivity that you see it from that scope. I do think a few people in time will sort of come out in contradiction to what you just said.
Hoping not.
What overall it does do, in my opinion, if people really embody that message, is show that, hey, maybe we're moving past all of this super intense, if you don't like us, then you're that. I mean, maybe we can just critique a good movie or a bad movie, whether there's men or women in it or whatever, because it's not a good film. And so many people loved the first one. I myself thought it was an awesome.
I enjoyed the first movie.
So I just think I hope we're moving past that, because I think that really diminishes art as a whole, and I think that was one of the worst parts of this past decade, in my opinion.
I agree. Specifically, the second half, much more so than the first half, but yeah.
Yes, I totally agree. So, Dom, before we move out of here, I have nothing really else left to add aside from my rating. If you want to jump into our final score.
Again, like I don't really have much else to talk about with this movie as far as kind of overall. Again, like here's the thing. I don't want it to be in the worst of the year, because technically made, it's not the worst movie I've seen of the year. And I think that, and I still think that there are other movies that I think would deserve this spot. But again, this is not one of the better movies that I've seen overall this year. It's definitely a movie that, again, well, I think that the biggest difference that I wasn't looking forward to this movie as much as everybody else was, but for this movie to just come and go and be what it was and not be as awesome. This movie is, just for all the problems that we listed off, this is only 2 out of 5 stars for me.
Yeah. Wow. I can't believe you gave it that many. For me, this is hard to say. This didn't come without a lot of thought and consideration, but this is a 1-star film. It fails to deliver on almost everything. If it wasn't for Gal Gadot being so goddamn charming as this character, I really wouldn't be able to find a star to give this film. And I hate to say that. I hate to be that super harsh guy, but I got to be honest.
Well, like I said, just good on you for being honest. And the only reason why I give it 2 is because, again, like, for a movie to like be 1 or even lower than a 1 for me, I'm like, that movie has to like be exceptionally bad, like poorly well made, poorly executed, just like annoying and ingratiating to watch. And for me, I've seen a decent amount of movies that like were much, much worse than this level kind of for me overall.
Fair enough. Well, Dom, let's jump into it.
Yes, let's talk into like the actual event of the night. So again, famously, this is not the only movie that was released on Christmas Day this year. So we're jumping ship back to Disney, but a different department of Disney, a department that we've talked about, ironically enough, on this podcast before. Actually, this year, we were able to, obviously, again, our first ever host that we had, Colin Williams of Colin Reviews, for our Onward episode back in March. Yeah. I've released a little, not as much, but I was able to get a little bit back into the Pixar swing of things this year. Obviously, my Pixar top 10 list, or my revamped Pixar top 10 list, I should say, is on the channel. And it's a good thing that I'm kind of re-releasing these lists a little bit and going back through, because it gives me a chance to kind of go back through and examine kind of recontextualize the things that I've really enjoyed and really come to like about just movies in general. And Pixar, again, I made it no secret that Pixar has been a tremendous staple of my childhood still to this day. Again, it is an animation studio that has become so synonymous with perfection of craft that, like, whenever a movie comes out that's like as far as any other animation studio would kind of just be fine and acceptable, when it's Pixar, it's like, no, this movie sucks. And I'll admit, I have definitely been a lot more harsh on the majority of Pixar movies that have come out this past decade than I feel like everyone else says. But again, for a studio that churned out kind of, to me, some of the most decade-defining and just kind of genre-defining movies that, to me, I've ever gotten in cinema for a decade and a half, and then to kind of just evolve into kind of like average, mediocre sequels and kind of half-baked ideas that it didn't feel like it was the studio was living up to the just tremendous potential that it had set up for itself. Where between the 95 and 2010, that run that Pixar had, you know, even, I guess with the exception of A Bug's Life and Finding Nemo, but again, I still love A Bug's Life and Cars. I still love A Bug's Life, and Cars still made close to $1 billion at the box office overall. So I think it's safe to say that, like, again, it was during that time period where whenever you got a Pixar movie, you knew you were going to have a hit. And then again, they kind of went downhill after Toy Story 3 overall. And while Onward, again, I wanted to give the benefit of the doubt, but when Onward came out, I'll admit I was losing faith, where I'm like, okay, if you mean to tell me that the best Pixar movie that I've seen since Inside Out is Toy Story 4, I'm not gonna. I was about to jump ship. I was like, I was about to say, you lost me, Pixar. And I was holding out hope because I still had the trailer for this movie that we're about to talk about to hold on to. And this trailer, just so many different incredible vibes that this gave me. Just, again, kind of the mix of and kind of the return to the Pixar that I knew, the Pixar that I fell in love with so hard as a kid, with mixing in some new kind of ideas and just overall vibes and aesthetics that were completely new to Pixar. Like, again, for Pixar, 2 years after Into the Spider-Verse, to have a predominantly African-American cast and just have like a completely different vibe overall. I was like, yes, finally, we're getting back to the old school Pixar, which is kind of always taken kind of these introspective, existential stories and presenting them in a manner that was both simple to understand and yet so weighty. Like we talked about this on our Toy Story episode, kind of the idea of what makes that movie still to me so perfect is that it perfectly set up this trend of these movies that in which they were intentionally designed to appeal to both kids and adults. And like I said, the biggest thing that was so disappointing to me of these last stretch of movies that we got from them is that they seem to be moving away from that. But I think it's safe to say, Chris, and I'm going to hand it off to you because, again, your responses to this movie overall made me so happy and just impressed me so much, especially since you've made your thoughts with just Pixar and animated movies in general clear when it comes to overall, like, this was a return to form for them, and this was a smack dab out of the park because, oh my God, Soul. I literally started off my review of this movie with the words ... fuck. That was the only thing that I'm like, there was no other way that I could start the intro to the movie. Just like the minute that you know you have a good movie on your hands, when I know I'm gonna love this movie before the actual movie started. During the opening credits, I'm like, this movie's already perfect. So Chris, go. Soul.
Yeah, as Dom said, I am not the biggest fan of this type of animation. Pixar is very hit or miss for me. Even when I was a little kid, I think as I've gotten older, I find it weird as an adult watching children's films because I just, I tend to actually disagree with a lot of people when they say there are more, I feel like they force more adult aspects into them and think deeper than was the original intent, because they want to hold on to being young again. And I can't blame anyone for that. I mean, it's the same reason I still revisit those first few records that got me into playing music over and over again. It brings me back to that special place. But I guess as a critic, I have to be honest when I say that I feel there is a little bit of stretching of the narrative in regards to adults, and especially like not you, Dom, but like the big name critics that we've been referencing when they talk about these films. I feel like they found so much out of Onward that just wasn't there. And it's something I've really learned a lot about, I think, critics this year in that upper echelon. But really, it's kind of my, I'd say, separation with watching these types of films. But like I always try to say, I give everything a shot. And especially if Dom's recommending me something, I'm like, all right, well, I at least have to give this a shot because Dom knows his shit. And I am so glad that we are covering this movie right now because this film, like you said, from something about like just like the first few seconds, you're going to like it, which never really happens to me. I don't understand how. I'm trying to wonder if it's this magical, mystical color palette that they found that hasn't been used since ancient religions, or if it's like, I don't know, the shapes and the way that they animate them. And it's like some mind trickery because it's just so mystifying and captivating from the gates. And I don't understand it. But my initial reaction is, what's not to love about this film?
Yeah, it's oh man, I don't want to for the purpose of not gushing about this overall, because again, just like so many emotions that I felt, just kind of alleviation, just happiness overall, that it's like, oh my God, Pixar can not only be good, they can still be fucking incredible. Just so many things that I want to give props to this movie overall. Just again, it's soft melodramatic nature. Again, the thing that I loved about those Pixar movies, those early Pixar movies were funny, but even when Pixar was at its most emotional, it was so beyond subtle for animation, which is something that is so atypical of animation, because most animated movies by nature seem to be geared towards being as poppy and flashy and as in your face and as attention getting as possible. And when you have a story where the characters, I would say, still are energetic, but like when you could just, the thing that I love about Pixar movies in general is that you could just get lost in the background. Like I was rewatching Ratatouille the other day, and that movie, as far as I'm concerned, is art. It helps that it's a movie about cooking and following your dreams and passion overall. But that is a movie that I could watch that movie over and over and over again and just go through every single background detail. And the same that I could say about kind of Wall-E, any of the Toy Story movies, Finding Nemo, Inside Out. Like that to me is part of the magic of Pixar overall. And this movie, among many other things, brought that back. And again, just kind of brought me back to that place of like, again, like I attribute kind of my love of movies in general. A large part of that is because of Pixar. And for this movie to kind of bring those thoughts back, again, is already attributed to it itself. And again, for this being a movie that, so Pixar is obviously always choosing each movie to focus on a different theme overall. Family has been a big part of that. Pursuing your dreams overall and letting your passions dictate you overall. Again, like they had that little bit of a weird trip into kind of, go in that Black Mirror direction with Wall-E overall, and like kind of continuing that with Upward, which is like, what does your life kind of come to mean? And they kind of had that little wrap up with Toy Story 3. And then you almost kind of dipped into that with Inside Out, where this movie seems to be kind of the next step in those couple of movies that have been coming out, where it's asking kind of, what is life? What are human beings? What kind of what is it kind of that we're here as a species to uncover? What is it kind of, what does it all mean? Is there meaning overall? And this movie kind of takes everything of those last couple of movies, but also kind of everything that like Pixar's been doing since its inception with Toy Story, right? Because that very existential nature is something that's been around since that first Toy Story, and kind of brings it all to light in this pitch perfect story that combined a guy trying to fulfill his dream to all the limits and constantly being at odds of being stuck in kind of the mundane average life, and kind of having to see the beauty of it by going on this existential quest in which his soul is literally separated from his body, so that and kind of seeing kind of, for lack of a better word, the things that we can't see in this kind of very cleverly created world, entitled both The Great Before and The Great Beyond, which basically is kind of the manufacturing ground where souls can go to Earth and live life as humans before they die and eventually move on to the Great Beyond. And he ends up kind of in this tutoring position with this one soul that has kind of just been floating around the Great Beyond for the better part of like 100,000 years. Who knows how long she's been there, named 22. And kind of their journey that they go on together, wherein he kind of has to almost rediscover the meaning of life by trying to get this soul to actually understand what it is that life is all about. And for this movie to be about all of that and still be just as entertaining, just as funny, just as clever, just as introspective, and just overall as endearing as so many other Pixar movies that I've seen before that, Wall-E. What? Like that's just how I say it, Joe. I thought that's how it was pronounced overall. Again, like I want to gush about it for days. Just the animation and how absolutely freaking incredible it is. All of the technicals, again, Pete Docter for directing, Kev Powers for co-directing and co-screenwriting. Oh my God, the score. I mean, again, I've gushed enough about Reznor and Ross this year, but fuck me, they do it again. Like not even a month after Mank, which was a score that I had to go back and revisit because I just didn't get how good it was the first time. And then they arguably do it again with one of the most understated Pixar scores for a genre of movies that are already known for being, with scores that are known for being understated. Like, I gotta stop or else I'm gonna keep going on a gush rant because goddamn this movie.
No, dude, you're 100% right. It is a masterpiece. I mean, I don't use that term easily. I don't even know if I have used that term yet on our show, so I'll use it now. I mean, this film fires on all cylinders. It works at the strongest possible level that it can in every aspect. There's a few things that really stood out to me. This character, man, Joe Gardner, right?
Yeah,
that's his name.
Voiced by Jamie Foxx in the best voiceover performance of the year.
He feels so human. I mean, it's so funny talking about this film in the same review as Wonder Woman.
Yeah,
because the animated movie has more life to these characters than the actual actors appearing in front of a real physical camera in real life. It blows my mind how they were able to do this. And what's really great about this film is it's so amazing to look at this through the lens of having Wonder Woman be right before it. It's almost hilarious. It's like, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And it's like a great example of each, because this film, it knew what it was doing in regards to this character, Joe. It's all about Joe and his journey, and he's trying to make it. And I really related to Joe. Obviously, I've been in the quote unquote game or hunt, whatever word you want to use. It's really, I've just been trying to professionally pursue music for my entire adult life. And I've had some ups, and obviously in the music industry, there's always 10 times more downs. And so I really off the bat related with Joe. I understood where he was coming from. It's tough to walk away from something that is your whole identity. I mean, before I had this podcast for 15 plus years, music was it. I was known as the music guy. Music's what I did. It's all I was ever going to do. I was going to live and die by that sword. If I made it or if I didn't make it, it didn't matter because I would still be pursuing it. And the way that they sort of not only use that passion of his to enrich his character, but the style of music that he loves, the way that the score sort of, when he's really ripping and his improvisational, he goes to what they call the zone, right? He is enriching the music, and the music's enriching his character, and it's enriching what we're doing, and we're getting that love and that passion for that moment. But when he's down and out, you see it in his playing, when he's sitting there in that piano scene right before the grand climax finale, when he realizes what he has to do is give 22 a chance. He plays those notes from the piano, and they're so somber, but it's still really good because he's a top tier, amazing musician. He just has had this change of heart. And it's just so like every little musical tidbit that they incorporated in this film enriched the narrative. And I think a lot of musicians out there would probably agree with me, especially those jazz heads who can get more out of it than I can, because I come from more of a rock and roll background. I mean, there were so many, just looking it up, different motifs and themes and callbacks to famous musicians and who have played the half note, which was a famous jazz club in New York City for years. It was one of the premier spots in Manhattan to play. If you played at the half note, you were on your way to something big and great. And I mean, those pictures on the walls in the half note apparently were pictures that were up there when I looked it up, and apparently some prominent figures have played there. And it's really cool to see how they nailed every aspect of it, but also what this movie did, talking about playing to its strengths. Then I'll turn it over to you, Dom. They had Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor do the sort of more synth style scores, but they actually had a modern day contemporary jazz musician, John Baptiste, compose the jazz music. And they mimicked his finger movements and his guitar playing, and they really they didn't mocap, but they really paid attention to detail. They recorded him playing, and it was almost like they mocapped it. So I was just thinking to myself, I was like, wow, that is so accurate. Like, I wish Guitar Hero did this back in the day, because those motions look terrible, and I still love that game. Imagine if they paid that much attention to detail.
It's so funny.
So this movie just does what you want to see in filmmaking, where it leaves no stone unturned because they clearly respect the story they were given.
It makes me, again, just kind of I'll use this word, hate everyone that diminishes the ability that animated movies have to appeal to everyone, that just because for the sake of it being animated, and animated movies are always kind of classified as being kiddie fare for whatever reason. That's just kind of the origin of animation. I widely said I don't like that, nor do I agree with it, but it's whatever. But the thing I think kind of my biggest takeaway from this movie was it does what Pixar does best, which is taking this idea of everything that kind of we experience it in real life and coming up with this kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of fantastical, out of this world allegory for it, and presenting that in the context of kind of the characters going on, for lack of a better word, the traditional adventurous aspect. Again, like, be it, again, we've said it, toys, bugs, fish, and superheroes, talking cars, rats, robots, the list goes on and on. Again, the biggest thing was, again, they're giving emotions to actual literal emotions. And Pete Docter, again, who to me has been behind some of the absolute best and most introspective when it comes to the Pixar movies, famously having done his contributions to the Pixar canon are obviously Monsters, Inc., Up, and Inside Out, famously. And this movie, again, as kind of the spiritual successor to all of those movies, and again, the capitulation of all of that, it takes so many different things that just people deal with on a daily basis. Again, kind of that overall, again, besides that existential feeling of your place in the universe overall, just doing what it is that you love, feeling whether it is that you actually can be accepted. What is the point of actually being accepted? Like, is it kind of better to be accepted and compromise, or just deal with the utter disappointment, but while at the same time, kind of having that understanding that at the very least you never had to be hurt in the first place. Just it's dealing with depression. Like, Pixar to me has always been one of the best, specifically now. Again, it's one of those studios that just seems to have matured with the audience who grew up with it, where it's dealing with kind of different personifications of depression and midlife crisis and all. Like, this movie is balancing a lot. I even had this written down as a point where it almost, and I've never once said this about a Pixar movie at all, because I think that Pixar does a very good job of handling that balance between kind of be just enough for adults versus for kids. Like I said, the biggest shock for me when I rewatched The Incredibles was seeing that argument between the parents there, and like literally feeling like I was watching, like, I'm like, okay, I'm not watching an animated movie. I'm watching a movie about a couple having a midlife crisis right now and having a marriage potentially fall apart as a result of it. I'm like, this is not kid stuff at all. It is only classified as kid stuff for being in an animated format. And this movie to me, just with everything that it's saying, like, we're the point where they literally just random drop the hell word, literally to the point where it's like, yeah, that shit doesn't even matter. Like, that's literally just kind of our conception. That's a conception that human beings came up with in order to kind of balance out and kind of get through life overall. And the fact that they just kind of just like basically in a movie for kids just being like, yeah, it is what you make of it overall. If you want there to be an afterlife, there is. Cool. That's kind of focusing a little bit too specifically overall on what this movie is going for. But what I had written down is that it almost feels a little bit too existential to be a kids movie. But then after that, I had written immediately under that, it kind of makes that the perfect kids movie overall. Because again, kids, they're going to see some gorgeous animation and they're going to hear some fun music and they're going to see a couple of characters that are just going from random bits and places, having fun, going on a crazy, wacky adventure and then, having that big get together moment at the end. But again, this movie to me, and the reason why I say it's more so like old school Pixar is because, again, the thing that made old school Pixar is the fact that they always had that self-aware nature to them of understanding that these would be stories that people would come back to over and over again. The inherent idea of rewatchability has always been there within cinema itself, because the idea of the cinema itself is that it's supposed to be a memory. Therefore, people can go back to it in order to get kind of an understanding of a different perspective of a time that they may have never been able to, experience themselves. But Pixar, to me, has kind of always been aware of that in the films that they've made. And there's a reason to me why, of all of the animated stories that I've gone back to, these ones to me always felt like they matter just a little bit more. And for this movie to kind of take all of that into account and arguably be at, there's a very strong argument to say that it's possibly the best that it's ever been when it comes to just presenting specifically that source material. Like, oh man, just...
Yeah, no, I totally hear everything you're saying. I actually thought about the sort of existential nature of this film as well. And I think that I do disagree with the one sentiment you said where in regards to that might bode well for children, because I think that there was a point in time where I had to pause this film and actually sit like for the first time ever really and process something that had just been put in front of me on the screen. And obviously I can't pause in a theater. So not to say there hasn't been other impactful moments like this in cinema, but for the first time in a long time, I paused when he's at that nightclub. He just played his first show with the singer Dorothea, and she says that line about the fish being in the ocean and the older fish saying, "Aren't you already here? You're not enjoying the moment," essentially. And it took me a while to really understand what she was trying to say there. And so I do think that considering this film was specifically designed for kids in the nature of Pixar and the spirit of what they do, I do think that unfortunately they fail in that regard, but it does still hit as many of those lovable notes that they have the adorable cat companion, the funny little hijinks in the second act that give you that Pixar feel. That I think there is still something here for children, and I'm actually kind of jealous of kids because I would love to grow up and sort of take this film with me throughout all the different various aspects of life. I feel like this is going to be such an amazing companion piece to kids who really latch onto this, that rewatch it throughout the rest of their lives, man, because this film has so much growth in the journey that Joe goes through, and I think it's like a fine wine where you wait to crack it open because if you can just wait those 50, 60 years, it's going to be amazing when you actually get into it. So for these kids to be able to get to go through all these different stages of growing up with this film, I'm so jealous of them for it, man, because they're just going to be like, when I was a little kid, that moment with the cat was just so funny where he's talking to his mom. But now I realize that's such a bonding moment and such an important change of heart and a realization between a mother and son. And it's just... I'm almost jealous because it's so well done. I do think it does, however, fail in regards to sort of doing the brilliant Pixar dance of being for adults and children at the same time. However, I do not think that diminishes the film by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to disagree with you just by nature of my bias towards Pixar. But like, this was the movie that when I started watching this, again, like a lot of other animated movies recently, again, I've been kind of doing the works with my niece. My niece is 2 now, so she's at the age where she can like kind of begin to understand and curate certain materials while at the same time not obviously fully processed. Like she's at to the point where she can like just focus long enough on stuff. And like I've been watching a lot of animated movies with her recently. I showed her recently the first 2 Shrek movies, the first Incredibles. She'd already watched the How to Train Your Dragon movie with her mom. I showed her this the dinosaur Disney movie. And so we're making our way kind of through the animated canon overall. It's this nice little bonding moment overall. It makes me, proud to like kind of be, have an extended family member once that I can actually, do that and share that with. But the biggest thing for me when I was watching this movie with her, where I turned this movie on, and unfortunately she had to leave before we could finish it, but we got about halfway through this movie, and the thing that I noticed immediately and I don't think I've ever seen this with her before, just in general, is that usually whenever I watch a movie with her, she starts to fidget a little bit. She'll start to like become distracted by things, kind of overall, just the various clutter on my desk overall, or she'll like kind of laugh when I laugh overall, not really understanding why something's funny, but I'll be like, yeah, that's silly. And she's like, yeah, that's silly overall. But I think this was the first time that I've watched a movie with her where the minute that this movie started, like from the minute that Pixar logo came on and the minute that opening shot came on, she did not blink once. Like not once. There was not a single minute of this movie that I saw where she was not fascinated and not interested. And that was apparent to me because, again, I'm never going to try and compare anyone to me because my relationship with just movies in general from a very young age was always essentially different. But that was the moment that kind of told me that's like, okay, this is kind of going to be her equivalent of Toy Story. This is going to be that movie that throughout her life, as she's growing up, this is going to be that moment that her generation of kids is going to go back to over and over and over again, that is kind of going to be with them at all walks of life, that they're going to kind of be able to relate to in turn as they're going through each different stage of life. And like you said, I'm jealous. Like, at the same time, I'm not, because again, they have a whole canon of animated movies that offer not exactly the same type of feeling, but similar types of feelings with that, again, with the entire extensive Pixar canon and all the Disney movies that, again, while not certainly as mature as certain other of the Pixar movies, certainly get to that level. And just there's a whole canon of animated movies that they have to go back through. And overall, just a whole bunch of memes they're going to grow up with, understand. That's getting into the minutia and the nitty gritty. But just for a movie like this to still exist in the year 2020 with this much amount of thought, with this much amount of detail, again, it's a comment that I've been making recently that, again, they like, not to sound like that old man, but they don't make them like they used to. And that unfortunately bears true for a lot of the movies that are made now today, where again, they just seem to be like what is it you said, like the goldfish mentality. They're to occupy your screens for a minute, and you blink and you forget about them, And it's really sad when that's the majority of movies that come out now, where even some of my favorite movies per year, I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna come back to this in a couple of years and be like, oh yeah, I remembered liking that movie. But this is a movie that I can say, again, for myself, this is a movie that I'm gonna come back to very, very frequently. And that's not something that I can say about a lot of movies that come out now, even my favorite movies. And I'm going to want to watch this over and over and over again. And I can tell that this is going to be a movie that's going to be with me for many, 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 many years to come.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly. I haven't related to a character like I relate to Joe Gardner in such a long time. This movie struck such a chord with me, no pun intended, because it really, but pun intended, it really captured not only the beautiful sort of way to look at the world, where take a moment, smell the roses. There's a reason that saying's been around forever. Enjoy the present day, because you might not have it tomorrow, and tomorrow might not be the same as it was today. Certain loved ones might not be there. Certain, things that you look forward to in your day to day might not be there. Look at 2020, for example. What a great movie to come at the end of this year.
Yeah,
really,
seriously.
around the holidays and at the end of this year. And it's just, on top of that level, I know my musicians out there, and speak up in the comments if this hit you. Like we all go through this sort of dark night of the soul that Joe goes through, where it's almost like, are we willing to shoot ourselves in the foot for our pride? We know our abilities are good, but the music industry isn't just based off that. Are we willing to stick it out in the trenches, hoping something happens? It is something I don't have an answer for in my personal life myself. It's something that I do know that all the biographies of the greats that I read and the interviews I watch when they speak, they didn't have an answer either. They just kept going. But you got to think about all those that don't make it, who are the substitute or not officially hired middle school band teacher, who don't even have a solid job because they're still pursuing in their middle age. They don't even have a solid relationship because everything's about getting to the gig late night, not getting that solid foundation. It's crazy to me that
sounds like you're speaking from a place of experience overall. I feel like this is a very relatable character for you specifically amongst other people.
I think it's something that like me and a lot of my friends think about. By no means am I at the age where it's like, ooh, I am this guy, but it's nice to see the harsh realities of pursuing any creative career not be romanticized, and to be done in this type of medium, in this film. It baffles me that we haven't gotten like a biopic like this yet. Like, where are all the great music biopics now? I got to ask, where are they? Because now they've all gone down a peg watching this film. It's just, that's how masterful this movie is to me, that it makes me have to reconsider almost everything I've seen in regards to like the musical realm and character studies and just writing in general. It's airtight in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just animated movies, are a genre that I hold in especially high regard for a lot of specific reasons overall. And for this type of movie to come around in a year like 2020 and for it to kind of elevate that just the next step that was just needed again. Into the Spider-Verse to me was really the last movie that I saw was like really elevated. And like every year I'm always waiting for that. I'm like, okay, I know I'm going to get like 4 or 5 animated movies a year now because we're spoiled and everything. But like, when's going to be that one animated, that real kicker that's really going to like kick me right in the heartstrings? It was Into the Spider-Verse in 2018. It was Klaus last year, which is a movie that again, not enough people have seen it. Again, people forget the fact that it's about Christmas. Just go watch that movie. That's incredible. That movie did not nearly get enough credit. Just the fact that I got nominated for best animated feature last year was awesome. And this is the movie for that this year. It elevates animation. It elevates story. To me, the reason why I'm about to give this movie the rating that I am about to give it is for the reason that this just elevates storytelling, which is just what I want from every movie. I know it's a tall order, especially now in just a modern day blockbuster economy of movie making in general. And just the fact that it's just the fact that there are too many movies made now. So not every movie can be as important as I would like them to be. And not every movie can be as well made as I would like them to be. And it always kills me how people always fall back in the excuse of, oh, well, it's just a movie, just enjoy it. I'm like, no, not when movies have told me that they can be like this. So why in the hell would I want everything else to kind of just be this mediocre garbage, But this movie elevates storytelling to me, and this movie elevates cinema, and it elevates kind of my relationship and my kind of endearment towards movies. And in a year that was so crushing beyond belief, and in a year that was constantly kind of reminding me, that was giving me so many different reasons, I should say, to not continue to pursue my passion and to just give up overall, for a movie like this to come around and offer just the antithesis of all those feelings that I was having and offer up just such a beautiful recapper of everything that I just love about life in general, and just this great little kind of flashback to my childhood while also kind of containing this bright lapse of what the future could be. I am wholeheartedly I am wholeheartedly of this opinion when I say this is a 5-star movie, which I don't even think I gave a movie last year 5 stars. And keep in mind, last year we had Parasite, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Uncut Gems, Klaus, and The Irishman. And I don't think I gave any of those movies 5 stars. This is a 5-star movie for me.
Yeah, you don't give those out easily. Wow.
No, not at all. That is a level of that is a level of merit that so few movies for me, that a movie has to be at such a high pedigree to crack for me the 5 stars. Like that should tell you something overall of what this movie accomplishes.
Yeah, man, this film is a must recommend for me to any walks of life, but especially to creators who, our art is everything to us, but is that sometimes to a fault? Sometimes is that and it's funny, I don't know why I'm watching this show. I guess it's really just to connect with some good friends who really enjoy this type of television, and to get in on that group text around the holidays. I really wanted to get in on that FaceTime, and I knew they'd be speaking about it. So I started watching this Burt Crenshaw Netflix show. And in one of the episodes, he has Caitlyn Jenner come on the show, and Burt Crenshaw's father was a huge track and field guy. Caitlyn Jenner famously won back in the day, out of nowhere, the ultimate come-up victory in track and field. And his father, this character's father, put track and field aside to raise his family. And so it always remained special to him. Track and field always remained something that was his escape, his freedom. But he always wondered if I would have pursued it, because Burt Crenshaw's dad was a pretty successful track and field runner. Would I have lost that spark? Would I have gotten so lost in it that I end up like a Joe Gardner? And I think every creative person at some point in time asks themselves that. And I think we ask ourselves that all the time. I just don't think we've ever had someone point at us and be like, this is what you're doing. Here's a way to think about this better and clearer. So this film is not only phenomenal, not only so enjoyable, and a film that is not only one of my top films of the year, but probably will be for my life. It's important. It's important to people who risk the stability of the normal day-to-day to see this film. And that's why it's a 5-star film, because it just asks so many questions.
Yeah,
man. It just asks so many questions that I've never even seen the greatest biopics answer. I mean, Ray, starring Jamie Foxx as well, is an amazing biopic, but that doesn't even get as deep as this film does in regards to just like risking something for a passion. This film is freaking gonna be timeless. If it isn't then I'm just wrong, and I will forever quit YouTube if this doesn't become timeless.
This movie is already timeless. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
But yeah, that makes me so happy. That touches my heart, honestly. That like you would give an animated movie of like my studio. Like I don't care what anyone else says. Pixar is mine. They're mine. I'm laying my claim down on it like a 5 cent. This is a fucking perfect movie. And again, this episode kind of started off a little bit depressing, but I'm so happy that we ended this season. We ended this absolutely dreadful year with this fucking masterpiece of a movie. Again, just coming off a year where I didn't think we were going to get any more masterpieces overall. No. But Chris, we did it. This is it. Season 2, buddy. We're on to season 3 next week. That's it, people. We have officially finished. Oh man. Sophomore season in the books overall.
I would give you a hug, but obviously we can't do that right now.
Later, that'll be for next year. Hopefully.
Congrats, man. Thank you guys so much in the community for being a part of this thing. You have been our fuel. You've been our fire. This is what we love to do, and we love sharing it with you guys. So very humbled. For real.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again. You guys, I'm not going to give like the traditional closer out because again, if you want to see what we have coming up, tune in for the new year. Season 3, we're going to have a lot of stuff as always that we promised. Again, follow us on our socials, Facebook and Instagram at Talking TV Podcast. Leave a subscribe if you like getting content from us overall. Again, just 186 subscribers last time I checked. And we're only growing stronger every day. So we're going to get to 200, and I'm hoping to, and I think we're going to hit 1,000 potentially during this year overall, 2021, onward and upward. That's all I have to say.
How many blanks in a what, Dom?
12 seasons and a short film. That's what it is. We got to start saying that at the end of every episode now. We just have to.
And a short film. And Dom, for the last time in 2020, do you have a message to leave the people with here tonight?
Thanks once again, people, to everyone who has been with me every single time I have been able to say, watch more fucking movies, people. Have a good night. We'll see you next year.